Welcome to the Storytelling That Sticks for Business and Life podcast. I'm your keynote, TED Talk and story coach, Doug Stevenson. In this podcast series, I'm going to share with you some simple and practical storytelling techniques and hacks that will make you stand out from the competition so that you can get paid to speak, or to give a TED Talk that goes viral, or to simply tell your story in a way that makes a difference in the world. You'll learn how to choose, craft, and deliver stories that stick. Personal stories from your amazing life, business stories, leadership and sales stories, stories that are marketable and memorable, stories that sell you and your product or service. My job as your virtual keynote and story coach is to help you design and deliver stories and speeches that get people to do what you want them to do, or to consider a new perspective. If you're serious about using storytelling to advance your career, to get paid to speak, or simply to get your message across in a more engaging and compelling manner, this podcast is for you. All right, well, let's get started. So I'd like to introduce you all to Dave Lieber, a multidimensional storyteller, because he is an author. He writes a column for the Dallas Morning News. He's the watchdog columnist, a consumer advocate columnist for the Dallas Morning News. He's written books like Bad Dad, about the worst 10 minutes of his life. He's written a play called Amon, the Ultimate Texan. So he's a playwright. He's an author of books. He's a columnist. He's a professional speaker. He's got a TED Talk called The Power of Storytelling to Change the World. So he has told stories and crafted stories in multiple ways: written stories, presented stories, TED Talk stories, keynote stories, written stories, books, playwrights. I mean, in every dimension, he is a master storyteller. So Dave, welcome to the Storytelling That Sticks for Business and Life podcast.
Thanks, man. I only dreamed of it as a little boy, having someone introduce me like that, like 50, 60 years later. So you just made my dream come true, you know.
Well, when you started out a long time ago, what was your vision of your future as a storyteller? Were you just interested in being a columnist and writing for a newspaper, or what?
Yeah, I just thought I'd be lucky if I could be a newspaper columnist, and that would be it. And then once I got doing that, I realized there were a lot more ways to communicate with people that I could experiment with. And I've basically experimented with everything I could think of in life, you know, just so many different ways to do it.
And so as a storyteller, as someone who has evolved into understanding not only the power of story, but the craft of story, how do you find, or how do you approach choosing a story to tell? What are your criteria for choosing a story that you're going to tell, either in written form or in a TED Talk or a keynote?
Well, picture this. I get about 50 letters a week from people to me at the newspaper, and they all want me to help them with their dilemma. And I have to pick 2 out of those 50 to do for my Friday and Sunday columns. And so I look for which ones tug at my heart, which ones are the most emotional, which ones will resonate with readers, which ones they'll read, which ones they'll click on, and which ones will help that person, and also help other people who are in the same situation or will be in the same situation. So I go with the heart. I go with my gut. What turns me on will turn on the reader. There's an expression, you've probably heard it: no joy for the author, no joy for the reader, no laughter for the author, no laughter for the reader. So I try and get in their head and figure out what they'd like to read.
So talk to me about your book, Bad Dad, about the worst 10 minutes of your life. What I love about this is when I see the title Bad Dad, I'm immediately curious. So that immediately hooks me in. But then the worst 10 minutes of my life in relation to being a bad dad, you've got me hooked. Now I want to know more. Tell me about how you come up with titles like that and hooks like that. Because I know that as a columnist, as someone who writes a lot, you're thinking about, how can I grab them with the title? What's the lead?
Yeah. Well, that's everything now. The headline is everything, and it's only 80 characters. And if you can't get a good headline, you might as well not have written a story because nobody's going to read it, you know. With Bad Dad, you'll recall that was the worst experience of my life. And I came to your studio and worked with you for 3 days, and we wrote a speech together. We wrote a play that I could go present to groups with and also sell the book. That was an example of my friend said, taking felon and turning it to felonade. Because what happened, this was back in 2008 when my youngest son was just, probably 11 years old. I took him to the local McDonald's. He misbehaved. I told him to do what my dad told me to do when I misbehaved. I just told him to walk home and without me, and I just drove away. I called my wife. She said, "Where is he?" I told her. She goes, "That's the city you keep writing all the bad stuff about, right?" I go, "Yeah." She goes, "You better get over there." And when I got over there, they basically set it up to arrest me and charge me with 2 felonies. And it made international news all over the world. And so the way to take care of that, to take ownership of that dilemma, was to write a book and write a play and take ownership of it so that people couldn't use it against me. I say, look, here's the story. It was political.
But what I find fascinating is you had something happen and it got tense. It got interesting. It went way out of hand. All of a sudden you're getting arrested and felonies and all kinds of stuff. And it's like, I was just trying to be a good dad. I was just trying to be a good parent and teach a lesson. And all of a sudden it goes way out of hand. And isn't that what we look for when we choose a story to tell as a speaker? We look for stories where it's like, wow, the obstacle got a little bit crazy and out of hand. And it can be both dramatic and humorous at the same time.
You and I basically look at life the same exact way, except you look at it through a theatrical eyes and I look at it through author journalism eyes. And basically the obstacle that you call it, I call it the low point. I use the V, I call it Dave's magic V-shaped formula, which shows the hero goes out in the world, gets knocked down by the villain, and then rises up and overcomes and wins the story. And that's the way I teach and learn and tell my stories, through that V, that low point. But you don't call it the low point, you call it the obstacle. It's funny about you and me. We talk about the same exact things, but we use different words to describe it, you know?
Well, I think everybody that talks about story and teaches story is basically working off the same premise, but we use different language. We use different terminology, but at the end of the day, story is built around crisis, obstacle, challenge, small or big disasters. You call it the V, the low point. But if there isn't friction or conflict in a story, right, we don't have a story.
That's right. You have to have something going on that really hurts the hero of your story. And all my stories have that. And then you have to really dig deep into it and live in that low point, that obstacle, for a long time and not skip through it, because that's where we learn. We learn from the bad stuff. We don't learn from the good stuff. People go, and then my wife got cancer, but then I went over here and I moved to Kentucky. I go, whoa, wait. Your wife got cancer? Did that change your life in any way? How so? Why? Just give me an example. Let me live in this low point for a while, because when you get out of it by doing that heroic move to get out of it, go up the side of the V to the climax, you're basically teaching me something that I didn't know before, which is how to overcome obstacles and learn to have a better life through stories and through experience of others told the proper way through stories.
What are some of the lessons other than the bad dad story? Because you've now been giving keynotes on different subjects. You've learned a lot about being in front of an audience and what it takes to grab and hold on to an audience and to take them from A to B to C. What are some of the lessons you've learned as you've evolved as a keynote speaker, as someone who goes out to promote your book or promote whatever, to speak about something?
Yeah, I think I've given about 2,000 talks in the past, since 2005, when I started seriously doing this. I think the most important thing when you give a keynote and you're trying to sell a book or sell an idea is you got to have humanity and you got to have humor. And you can't miss any opportunity to be funny in a way that's self-deprecating, that make people like you and think that you're pretty cool and you don't smell your own shit. You're like, all right. I mean, So that's one of my things. I think I gave a talk yesterday to a group, and they were laughing in the middle of my comedy. I didn't even have to finish the sentences. They would laugh in the middle of the sentence because they knew what was coming. And I never really experienced that. And I had to think about you and think about what you taught me with the power of the pause. So I had to stop and just watch them laugh and then go back into it again. And it was very awkward for me because I just would stand there and I felt like I was waiting an hour and I was really only waiting like 2 seconds. But they were like, they knew what I was going to say before I said it. And it was a hit because they laughed for an hour straight. And when people laugh for an hour straight, they really go back and tell all their friends and have a good time.
And what was the title of that speech?
The dog of my nightmares, moving to Texas from New York. And I make fun of what it was like to be a Yankee down here and how I didn't fit in and how I prayed and how I met a good woman, because the Texans pray about everything. And then how I had kids and I got her crazy dog, the dog of my nightmares. And, you know, that's just a fun story about taking someone out of their natural environment, which for me is Manhattan, and putting them in the middle of right-wing, nutty Texas.
It's a fish out of water story, and that's always going to create a lot of good self-deprecating humor because you have placed yourself in an awkward situation, and audiences love awkwardness. They love, embarrassing situations. They love it when we can poke fun at ourselves with a twinkle. I always say, if you're going to poke fun of yourself or sarcasm is a staple of comedy, but you need to do it with a little twinkle.
Yeah, that's right. You and also you want them to relate to it. So it touches something in their life that happened that's similar. And they'll come up to me and they'll go, I had a dog like that, or I moved from Texas to New York. And, that's really always interesting because I know it touched them and they'll think about it and they could relate to it. And I love that.
Well, there's always some kind of a universal truth underlying everything that we do. That's a commonality. It's like you say, it's humanity. It's the common human experience.
And what you just said there was like the key phrase. Universal truth. That's the key 2 words in all of this. You want to tell stories that people can relate to and that mean something in their life, not only yours. And it's not just some silly little one-off story, but it's so important that you can keep telling it for the rest of your life because it's the universal truth. It matters to everybody in the world. I love that phrase too. I'm glad you reminded me of it.
Now, one of the quotes that I heard you say in your TED Talk, and once again, if people want to listen to the TED Talk or watch it on YouTube, it's called The Power of Storytelling to Change the World. And one of the things you said is the brain is set up to listen to story.
Right.
And in that TED Talk, you're actually analyzing and teaching why story works so well. Can you go into that a little bit more? What do you mean by the brain is set up to listen to story?
Well, I learned from some scientists that we have millions of neural endings in our brain, and they get excited and they dance around when we hear a story. But when we lecture and we give bullet points and facts, they're dead. They're not. But as soon as the speaker goes, okay, here's a story. And I know you say, don't say that, just tell the story. But you say, here's something. And the brain all of a sudden erupts with excitement because someone's telling you a story that's really cool. And I feel that all the time when I go out and listen to speakers. I'm deadly bored. And then all of a sudden, when they start telling a story about their life or their situation, I'm fascinated. Those neural endings wake up and dazzle. And you can really only do that with story. I like to joke that I'm president of the American Anti-Bullet Association, because I think that we ruined stories when we went to PowerPoint. People started just showing slides, and all of a sudden the storytelling ethos in business was dead. And now it's come back, as you know, and a lot of it has to do with you going around the world and teaching people how to do this. But I have a phrase that I use. It's my phrase that pays. You taught me to have a phrase that pays, and mine is, if you're not talking in stories, you're not talking.
If you're not telling stories, you're not connecting, is the way I say it, because when we tell a story, you talk about the neurons. there's a thing called mirror neurons, mirror neuron responses. And so when there's a dramatic moment in your story that you're talking about with your bad dad and the cops show up and you're getting arrested, mirror neurons show up in the listener's brain in a way that they feel like they're being arrested. They're the ones that are in trouble. They're the ones being a bad parent or relating to whatever that danger is. And so there's a lot of science that, when you and I started doing this, there wasn't a lot of science around storytelling and why does it work? People would just say, well, I know stories work. But then when I started teaching it, people were like, yeah, but Doug, where's the proof? Why? Do you have any science? Do you have any facts? And it was challenging for me because I didn't care about science or facts. I just said, well, they're amazing and I'm amazing and they're great. It's like, no, people challenge me in my audiences, my corporate audiences. They wanted to know how and why. So you and I have both been, because you are a business storytelling strategist as well as I am, you teach storytelling as well. When you teach storytelling, what are a couple of the main things that you want to impart to people? What are the lessons about story that you want to impart to them?
I remember I went to a high-tech company and I was teaching them what they do. And I said, look at you guys don't do A, B, alpha 1, 5 RAM. You guys put in a 911 system in the city of so-and-so. And you guys over there, you just take a whole hospital center and digitize the entire hospital records for them. And yet on this board here, it says that you do R312 RAM 1. Why don't you speak English and tell people that really your whole job in life is to make the world a better place? And the CEO is sitting in the back and he goes, I've ran this company for 15 years, but I never thought of it that way. And that really made me feel good because he didn't really understand his significance in the planet. He thought he was doing tech when he was doing humanity.
Have you ever found yourself working on a story and at a certain point you just have to drop it because you just realize, I'm working on this and it's just not coming together. I can't find a lesson that's viable or powerful enough, and I need to choose another story?
Yeah, I don't generally have that problem. When I pick a story, I can make it work. And that comes from my newspaper training, which is don't give up. Just go back over it over and over and over again until it comes out the way you want it to. It's not going to be a first draft story. So yeah, that's not really a problem for me. I pretty much trained to make anything work. And sometimes I surprise myself because I made it work, but it's a struggle. Sometimes these 800-word stories that I'll do for the paper take 6 to 8 hours to write, which is a long time to write an 800-word story.
Well, you just mentioned something about first draft, and a lot of people, I think they're going to sit down and they're going to write the story and that's going to be it. But as a columnist, first draft, second draft, revision, tweak, find another angle. You keep working it, massaging it, and pushing forward. But you don't just stop at the first draft, because how often do you write a first draft and you go, oh, great, done?
Well, my newest book, which I can tell you about a little later, it's a football star book. It's a first draft book. I pulled it off. I didn't really need to go back and redo a lot of it, which was really kind of fun. Next week, I'm getting a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Society of Professional Journalists in Fort Worth. And what I'm going to do, instead of giving them a thank you speech, which everybody gives, which is always like, hey, journalism is great, don't give up, we got a future, blah, blah, blah. I'm giving them all 15 little tips that I have learned as a writer, something that they could take away. And I'm going to have copies for all of them to take it away, and hopefully they'll want to. And on that tip sheet, let's see, there's something. Oh yeah, I teach them how to edit the way I edit. And I do 2 or 3 things that most writers don't do, which amazes me. The first is I use the read aloud portion on Microsoft Word, which is under review and then read aloud. And I pop that read aloud on my web, and I listen to the computer voice read my story to me. And that really helps me because I don't have to read it out loud anymore, which I always found to be a pain in the butt. And I just listen to the computer read my story, and I stop, change the word, play, stop, change the word. I hear all these really cool things. Then what I like to do if I have time, and because I write on deadline, I also don't always have time, I like to send the story to my cell phone and read it on my screen, because that's how most people are going to read it anyway. And so why not read it the way they read it? And mistakes pop out that you don't find when you read aloud and when you use your cell phone. that changed my life, and that made it so much easier to do rewriting. Rewriting is so much fun. Rewriting is the best part of writing because you get to become a different personality. You, the writer, just wrote it, but now you're the editor. You come in and look at that, what that guy wrote, and you just make it so much better. It's really important. People think, well, I wrote this really great, I don't need to edit it. You have to have an editor. I mean, you have to. I don't show anything without it being read by someone else. And when there's no editor available, I go to my beloved wife, Karen, and I have her read it. And she's got great instincts, just like your Deborah does, and knows what works and what doesn't work and helps me. And so that's how I rescue myself. But yeah, rewriting is so much fun. And I also write to music. I like the Spa channel on Sirius XM because there's no words, there's just music background. And I use that to get my mind excited about writing and rewriting. I have a playlist that I have that I'll use for rewriting and editing that plays in the background. And I found that music makes it easier for me to write and to rewrite because it stimulates the brain somehow and makes me more creative.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that because I found that sometimes when I sit down to write my podcast episodes, I don't always have the energy that I need to sit down and write. Sometimes I'm having a tired day or whatever. Yeah. And there are certain songs that are on my playlist, and I'll put on one of those songs and it will elevate my energy and it'll get me kind of pumped and happy and in a better mood. And then I can start writing. And then I switch to just background music, beautiful, jazz or something in the background. And I find that helps me write as well, because I'm creating an atmosphere around myself within which I can be creative. I think the critical thing you're saying there is you got to train your brain. The creative process is hard. It's elusive. It's tricky. And in order to get ourselves into that creative zone, into that discipline, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do this creative work now as if I can just be creative on demand. And so I think it helps to have these little techniques and tricks to help train your brain that when I hear that song, it stimulates something in me that makes me want to sit down and create.
Yep. And another thing about it is you can go backwards on a story. So I'll take a story that I've written and I'll blow it up so that one paragraph shows up on the screen on my computer. The letters are like probably 25 font.
Yeah.
And I'll look at that and I'll read it backwards, and then I'll go up, and I'll basically go back to the top of the story. And because I'm reading it out of context, I see mistakes or improvements that I can make that I didn't go when I went from A to Z. So go from Z to A. It's remarkable that all this stuff works. Everything we're talking about here works. Everything, the backwards, the phone, sending it to your phone, the read aloud, blowing it up big on your screen, going upside down, all that stuff works. It's amazing. You find 20 or 30 things that you miss going down the normal A through Z because your brain just skips over.
Well, what I love about what I'm hearing from you is that you have discovered, how does Dave Lieber create? What are all of these things that I can do to get myself to be creative, to get myself in the zone? What are the tricks and tips for me? And I'm not saying I'm not saying your things will work for everybody, but what you're basically saying is I've had to learn how to work with myself. I've had to figure out my triggers. I had to figure out what can I do to get me into these different zones. And I think moving forward and giving that to the people listening to this, would you suggest that they experiment with all kinds of different wacky, weird things to try and figure out, well, how do you get creative? How do you do it on demand?
Well, yeah, I mean, the music does it for me, but I would say that for other people, it might be a glass of white wine, or in states where it's legal, it could be marijuana, or it could be sitting outside on a beautiful spring day in the park on a bench or in your backyard. There's just all kinds of things that you can do to take you out and put you in that creative sphere. And it wasn't until recently when I did a book that was turned into the play, Aim and the Ultimate Texan, that I realized that that this was so important, that you had to take yourself out of your element, put yourself in a new place so you could think new things. I go to the library a lot, and I sit there with my headphones on, listening to the spa, and I have a big pile of work in front of me, and it's just me and the table and the pile and the music in my ear. And I get 10 times as much work done in that environment than I would at home because I'm away from home. There's no distraction, there's no phone, and I'm getting stuff done. And the point about this is the discipline is so crucial. You have to have discipline. You have to, be willing to put your ass in the seat. You have to be able to stay in that room for 2 hours and work. You have to be able to stick with it and not quit, because so many people quit. This is a hard thing to do. And it's worth it though, because people come up to you after and they tell you how much they loved it. And that's just music to hear. So.
Boy, I tell you, I learned that lesson writing my book because it took me 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote it in one way, and then I wrote it in another way, and then I wrote it in my way. I kept trying to write it based on what people were telling me I should do. And finally, I just went, screw all of these people. I'm going to write the book the way I want to do it. I'm going to do it self-publishing.
Yeah.
I'm going to give my own title. I'm not going to let anybody force me into some format. Now I want to switch gears. I want to talk about your TEDx experience.
Okay.
What was that like for you? How did you get chosen? How long did you have? What are some of the technical things about that you had? And how did it work for you? How did it go?
I love being asked that because nobody ever does. And it was one of the greatest days of my life. I had to do a tryout, and the lady in charge didn't know me from Adam. And all the other speakers before me were having technical difficulties with their slides. This was the audition. And it was so frustrating to watch them, each one struggle with their clicker. And I don't use slides. I don't use the clicker because I don't want to be in that situation. So I'm the last speaker, and I get up there and I start making fun of all the other speakers and showing sympathy, but making fun of them. I cursed. As Christine Cashin, one of my favorite speakers along with you, said to me, man, you were in your zone. The audience absolutely erupted in a way that they were like, it was a relief for them to see someone make fun of what had just gone on. So she picked me and she put me last on the actual stage at downtown Dallas. And so I listened to all the other speakers who were really good. And there were college presidents and, different really wonderful people. And so I was sitting in my chair and I was freaking out. But then I got up there and I got in the zone and I started talking about what the other speakers had talked about, and how it related to storytelling. The ones that did really well. And then I talked about the scientists who couldn't tell a story if their life depended on it. And there were a lot of scientists on that program. And then when it was over, I went out into the lobby and I was surrounded by like 30 people who wanted to talk to me. I had touched them in such an emotional way, was amazed at the power of those 20 minutes. It changed my life. And the way I prepared for it emotionally was I took a picture of the auditorium from the stage and I scotch taped it to the seat in front of me. And I just kept looking at that picture as they all spoke. And I said, this is when I get up there, this is what it's going to look like. I'm going to see this view, this point of view. And so those are the little tricks. And then that night I recorded it in my pocket on a recorder, because I always record everything important. I have like 30 little little digital recorders. And I got home that night at midnight and I went outside in front of my house, and it was dark, of course, and I had the recorder and I walked back and forth in front of my house and I listened to the recording of my TED Talk. And it's so ecstatic how it sounded. I hadn't seen the video yet. And then eventually when the video came out, I got a note from you telling me how much you loved it. And that meant the world to me. That was like winning the Nobel Prize. And so that really was like one of the greatest days of my life. And I've used that talk as my video for a speaker video because I could not really even think that I could ever improve on it. That was the best day. Aside from the day that I met and married my wife and my kids, that was the best day I think I've ever had, especially in speaking, because it really showed all the work that I had done to get there to that point.
And it sounds to me like you allowed yourself to just really show up and trust that I can kind of summarize what some of the other people did, connected to my topic, which is the power of storytelling to change the world, teach my storytelling, but also be present and bring everything together right there in front of the audience. It's kind of like improv and structure all at the same time. Would you say that describes it somewhat well?
Well, yeah, the audition was improv completely because I didn't know that I was going to get up there and make fun of everybody and be like crazy. Then the TED Talk, though, that was heavily structured. And
Or was it?
oh, yeah, I knew exactly where I was going, what I was doing, because I only had 18 minutes. And this talk is a 45-minute to a 1-hour talk. So that's what upset me the most, is that I had to take this thing and turn it into a shorter version. That was the tricky part, but it worked.
Well, there's all different approaches. And sometimes, like when I did my TED Talk in San Antonio, I basically had scripted it and memorized it because I didn't have 18 minutes. I had 12.
Yeah.
And as you and I know, the shorter the time, the less opportunity we have to ad lib and go off track. I mean, you've really got to be disciplined. If you're doing 12 minutes or 18 minutes, you've really got to stick to the program. You can't go off on tangents all over the place. But everybody listening to this is hearing from all of the different people that I interview, from me, and from all the things that I teach. I hope everybody's learning from this that you have to find your own way. Some of us memorize, some of us don't. Some of us script, some of us don't. Some of us use PowerPoint, some of us don't. There's all different approaches. But at the end of the day, you've got to own your own personality, your own power, your own presence, your own way of doing things. And it's got to be human and real. And stories are the foundational piece of this. So if someone is listening to this and they're thinking about, they've got a dream, a vision of being a TED Talk speaker, what do you suggest in terms of them approaching an organization and putting in a proposal of some kind? How did you discover that worked?
Well, I only applied for that one at SMU, Southern Methodist University, but I've known a lot of people who applied for a lot of TED Talks. And you basically have to do a Google News alert for the phrase TEDx speech. And anytime TEDx shows up on the internet, it'll send you an email. So now you have a lead. And you know they're going to have it. You know they're looking for speakers. So you write them a letter, and it's a 1-page letter, and you say, hey, I'd love to do this. I've had this experience. How can I try out? How can I be considered? And then maybe send them a 20-second or a 40-second video clip that shows that you don't have an eye in the middle of your forehead and you can speak English or Spanish or whatever language it involves. And you're going to have to get lucky, and you're going to have to be perseverant, and you're going to have to try over and over and over again. And you're going to have to be willing to fly to a new city to do it. And it's a lot of work setting it up. But they're looking for good speakers. So if you can prove that you're a good speaker, and they're looking for diversity, and they also want a whole bunch of different kinds. They want a scientist. They want a kid who made the water well in Africa. They want a teacher who quit after 40 years. They just want that whole lineup to be really cool. So, yeah, I think it's very doable, but you got to actually be smart about it.
Well, Dave, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today and getting your perspective on so many things as an author, as a speaker, as a playwright, so many different ways, such a multidimensional approach and life of learning about stories. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom.
And I appreciate all you've done for me and helped me understand how to do this better, because you have, more than any other person on the planet, helped me do this. And so I'm really grateful to you, Doug. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. It's been a pleasure working with you, and I always learn from you as well. Thanks a lot. All right. Well, that's it for this episode. If you feel that you learned something valuable today, something that you can use that will make your stories stick, stories that make you and your business memorable, marketable, and monetizable, there are 3 things I'd like you to do. First, click on the follow or subscribe button and leave a review wherever you listen. And second, share this podcast with your friends and coworkers, your email list, and on social media. And third, connect with me on LinkedIn. And when you're ready to get serious about taking your stories to the next level, or if you have an important speech, presentation, or TED Talk coming up, or if you want some guidance on how to make the transition to becoming a professional speaker, let's schedule your free 30-minute coaching session where we can get to know each other and see if we're a good fit. And as always, I'd love to hear from you with your questions and comments. Let me know that you're out there listening and learning. You can send an email with your questions, comments, and suggestions to Deborah@DougStevenson.com. That's Deborah, Deborah, @DougStevenson.com. Hey, thanks for listening. Until the next episode, I'm Doug Stevenson.